All right, welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're decoding the hidden psychology behind, honestly, some of the most frustrating human behavior you're ever going to encounter. We've all been there, right? Dealing with someone who just leaves us feeling completely baffled and totally exhausted by their actions. But instead of just getting annoyed, which is incredibly easy to do, we're going to look at this analytically. We really want to understand the architecture of a very specific, very tricky mindset.
Okay, let's dive into this. I want you to picture someone in your life right now. They might be charming, they might even be highly successful or a real high achiever on the surface. But as you get closer to them, this glaring, recurring pattern just pops up. No matter what happens, we're talking a failed project at work, a really messy breakup, or a totally missed deadline, it is never, ever their fault. They always seem to play the victim of circumstance, and they consistently expect everyone else to clean up the messes they create. So why do they actually do this?
Well, when we run into people who are untrustworthy or who constantly dodge responsibility, our first instinct is usually to picture a villain. We think of this master manipulator, someone intentionally trying to ruin our day. But psychology actually suggests a massive pivot in how we view this. This personality type isn't necessarily a malicious, evil mastermind, not at all. Instead, what we're really looking at is an emotionally immature and incredibly fragile ego. Their brain is basically hijacked by hidden internal mechanisms that are desperately designed to protect their very fragile sense of self from the harsh pain of reality.
And honestly, understanding this shifts our entire perspective. So we're going to dissect the 5 hidden mechanisms that make this the one personality type you should never fully trust. We'll look at how they avoid blame, demand freedom, hide their true motives, get hyper-defensive, and ultimately flee from pain. Let's break these down one by one so you can spot exactly what's going on beneath the surface.
Right, so here is our first trait: constant responsibility avoidance. One of the absolute biggest, most glaring red flags of this personality is their total refusal to take ownership of their actions. Seriously, when a mistake happens, they do not look inward. They immediately point the finger outward. It was just bad luck, it was their totally unfair boss, their unsupportive partner, or, their difficult upbringing. Psychologically speaking, if they were to actually step up and accept responsibility, it would force them to confront deeply uncomfortable truths about their own flaws. So they prioritize protecting that fragile ego over the truth, which means you can never really trust them to be honest about their actual role in any conflict.
And this brilliantly illustrates our second point, what we call the man-child dynamic. This is all about wanting the freedom without any of the heavy lifting or consequences. Emotionally immature individuals desperately crave the independence and the choices that come with adulthood. They want all the fun perks, but they don't actually want to pay the rent, so to speak. They'll make these massive, sweeping promises or dream out loud about incredible future successes, but they completely refuse the accountability required to make those things a reality. Because they rely entirely on other people to solve their problems, they tend to just bail the exact second a task becomes difficult or boring. They are chasing the benefits of a connection, for sure, but they totally reject the hard work and responsibility required to maintain it.
Moving on to the third trait, we find that their behavior is driven by personal motives they are just completely terrified to admit. Now, human behavior is complex, we know that. It's often driven by motives that feel way too socially risky or awkward to say out loud. But the blame shifter takes this to a whole new level. They actively hide their deepest fears and their real intentions behind a very carefully constructed mask of confidence, or sometimes just a mask of sheer chaotic busyness. Because they are so afraid of self-confrontation, they might not even know what they genuinely want out of life. And since they don't know what they want, their loyalty to you? Yeah, that's going to be about as fluid and unpredictable as their current mood.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how perfectly it highlights the contrast in processing feedback. Look, emotionally mature people have this ability to separate their behavior from their inherent self-worth. If they mess up, well, it's just a mistake. It doesn't mean they're fundamentally a bad person. But the blame shifter, they literally cannot make this separation. They attach every single failure directly to their core identity. This means even the smallest, most gentle piece of constructive criticism triggers an immediate massive defensive response. We're talking sudden anger, intense sulking, or just completely shutting down and withdrawing. They literally see your honesty as a direct threat to their survival, and you simply cannot trust someone who views your genuine attempts to help them as an act of betrayal.
Let's guide you through how this builds into our fifth trait: prioritizing immediate emotional relief over actual growth. Real growth and building real, solid trust requires the ability to just sit with discomfort, repetition, and uncertainty. But the blame shifter wants an out, right now. If a situation becomes heavy or exhausting in step 1, they do not work through it. Instead, they jump straight to step 2, frantically seeking a new life overnight or totally fresh start just to escape the pain. And finally, in step 3, they will abandon you. They simply refuse to process the difficult emotions that staying would require.
When things get truly difficult, their brain doesn't just see a normal challenge to overcome. No, it perceives a mortal threat. It flips a switch and enters full-blown survival mode. This is the dramatic climax of their entire behavioral loop. In this state of pure panic, their one and only goal is immediate self-preservation. This overriding, intense need for instant relief makes them incredibly likely to just vanish into thin air or actively push you away. And here's the kicker. They aren't even doing it to hurt you, necessarily. They're doing it solely to protect their own fragile peace of mind, literally at any cost.
Which brings us to a pretty hard, clinical truth. Trust is built on the foundation of accountability and ownership. End of story. If you're dealing with someone who chronically refuses to grow up and take responsibility for their own life, you have to understand the stark reality of the situation. They aren't just being difficult or a little stubborn. They are fundamentally, psychologically unequipped to be a reliable partner or a dependable friend. Without accountability, that foundation for trust, it just simply does not exist.
So, that leaves me with a question for you. What small patterns are you completely overlooking in your own life right now? Honestly, are you making excuses for a blame shifter? Because once you start understanding the hidden psychology behind everyday human behavior, you really start noticing these tiny, repeating patterns that most people miss entirely. If you enjoy decoding these kinds of dynamics and want to learn more about the psychological frameworks that shape our world, definitely hit subscribe. We're going to keep bringing you these deep dive explainers so you can navigate your relationships with absolute clarity. Catch you in the next one.